All right, good morning, everyone. We are LeanYEG. We are a dedicated committee of volunteers responsible for organizing the Edmonton Lean Community of Practice. We are just one of many communities across Canada that are aligned with the Lean Design and Construction Canada, and we host a Lean Coffee session on the third Friday of every month from September through June. These sessions provide a unique platform where passionate Lean practitioners like yourselves engage in insightful discussions, expand their knowledge, and explore the practical applications of Lean methodologies. So today we're having a presentation, and our speaker is a leading expert in progressive design build, known for helping owners navigate the complexities of project delivery. As an attorney and consultant with Progressive Design Build Consulting, LLC, she specializes in developing PDB projects and crafting procurements that ensure the right teams are selected for success. With experience on over 45 PDB projects across US and Canada, totaling more than $11 billion, she brings invaluable insights into what makes PDB effective. A recognized thought leader within the Design Build Institute of America, she has played a key role in shaping industry standards, including serving as past chair of the DBIA National PDB Resources Committee and contributing as the primary author of the DBIA Progressive Design Build Deeper Dive. Please join me in welcoming Robynne Thaxton.
Thanks, Avel. I really appreciate you guys asking me to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, which means that I have to move things around because it's Teams. So thanks. I'm Robynne Thaxton. I have the least creative naming skills in the country. So when I decided to create, I'm not, like Red 5, that's so creative. I've always kind of admired that name. I'm like, Progressive Design Build Consulting. It's descriptive, at least. So, you don't have to wonder about what I do. Again, my background is as an attorney and consultant, and I started getting into doing design build because I did not like construction by combat. I think that's really what all of our baseline is. I remember being, I've been a lawyer for about 36 years. And I remember when I was a young lawyer and I was like having, starting out, people were calling me and asking me questions. And I kept thinking, why are you talking to me as opposed to talking to the other side? So my journey through all of this has been to, as much as possible, release parties from the inhibitions and create contract methodologies that allow people to talk, open up lines of communication. And I love today's topic because PDB, Progressive Design Build, Integrated Project Delivery, and Alliancing are actually all very, very similar. IPD and Alliancing are similar enough that within the hour today, I know that there are differences between them and how you develop certain things, but within the hour today, we're going to kind of put those together because we don't have a whole lot of time. So we're really going to talk about how they're similar and how they're different. And they are so similar, but then have a fundamental basic difference in how some of the things are structured. If you have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat. I can't really see it, but I promise I will try to get to it. If I can glance at it and see it, I will try to answer it. But we will have time at the end for a good discussion and a nice, robust chat. So let's just start off. The first thing I thought I would do is, let's get over here, is define what the various entities look like from a structural standpoint, because they do look very different. In a design build basic structure, we have the, there we go. I'm going to move this so that you guys aren't looking at it. We have the owner with a single contract going to a design builder who is then in charge of and responsible for a number of different sub liabilities or sub responsibilities underneath them. Each one of those different types, and there's actually, probably it's on a spectrum of what people are doing, but each one of them have their own type of subcontract, their own liabilities, their own responsibilities. But the point is that in this basic risk structure, there's a single contract with the owner, which makes the design builder responsible for both the design and the construction. And hopefully they are doing this in a way that is collaborative. And I don't know how you can do design build without it being extremely collaborative, especially progressive design build. Progressive design build and IPD are similar in that we don't select based upon an upfront lump sum understanding of what the cost, schedule, and scope are. We select the best team for the project, and then we progress through the process collaboratively, identifying risk, allocating responsibility for addressing those risks, and collaboratively designing the project, establishing the cost, and establishing the overall schedule. So in a single contract, the owner is basically responsible for funding and providing the guidance for what the project requirements are. The design builder is a single point of responsibility for both design and construction. Underneath that design builder, when we look up to the structure, those professional sub-consultants provide a professional standard of care, just like in most any other delivery method. The design build subcontractors guarantee the performance requirements for their scope. The design assist subcontractors act a lot like CM at risk type subcontractors, trade contractors. They get those prescriptive plans and specifications through the design builder, so they get the spare and warranty. And then we have suppliers that are, governed by typically a purchase order. But all of those, the design builder has the responsibility of managing all of those risks. And ultimately, what that means is the design builder is responsible for those performance requirements to the owner. And a performance requirement is a contractual requirement that says this is what the result is at the end of the day. A prescriptive requirement is something that says this is how you're going to get the project's ultimate goal performance requirements. And in design build, one of the hallmarks of a design build project is that performance requirement is on the design builder. The parties do discuss those risks and allocate those risks through a progression of, developing collaborative development, which means that by the time they've set the pricing structure, those risks are hopefully identified and priced, and where, the parties have, hopefully, if it's done right, they've allocated the risk such that we utilize contingencies and allowances and those types of things to be able to actually figure out who's going to be responsible, who's going to be managing those risks. For large projects, the overall contract typically contains a limitation of liability to the design for the design builder. My philosophy is always that no project should be, you should never be able to kill a company through a project. That's not what they sign up for. They should sign up for a manageable level of risk, and often there is an overall limitation of liability. The contracting structure, there's different types, but if you're utilizing best practices, you're using a fully transparent cost plus overhead and profit fee with a guaranteed maximum price. It is possible to utilize other pricing structures, and people are actually working with utilization of a target pricing structure within progressive design build. Excuse me. But most public owners, thank you, Phil. I work for public owners, and at least most public owners that I work with either are required to or just they have the desire to have that capped GMP. In any event, it is an option. But fully transparent costs. The risk reward function is just a function of the fact that the design builder is often responsible for any cost above the GMP and also could be responsible for specific liquidated remedies. So for example, you might have, the damage or the remedy for not being able to achieve some of these performance requirements, which can be a very large issue, might be something that you've liquidated to limit the liability of the design builder in whether they achieve it or don't achieve it. So you might say, for example, I work on a number of hydro projects, and we had a situation where there was a specific test and, failure to achieve the test. When you go through the law of remedies, it's going to be really hard to figure out what the cost of that is. So we liquidated that both as a limitation of liability, meaning that if they met the test, fine. If they did better, they're going to get a reward. If they did worse on that test, there was going to be a structured payment. It works a lot like the risk reward, but it's based on a performance requirement. The other risks are managed through contingency and allowances. So underneath that GMP, there's the cost of the work, and then there's always a pot of money that the design builder controls that is usually utilized for escalation, and things like subcontractor buyouts, that kind of thing. But we also use allowances when things are too risky. So let's just say, I don't know, there's a random tariff being produced at the last minute. That's going to happen. So sorry. I'm a little jaded at this point on those things. But all of a sudden things might get more expensive. We might put that in an allowance and allow the ultimate GMP to float based upon the actual costs. Again, you tailor those incentives to whatever what works for the project. So savings under the GMP is a common incentive, but a lot of my clients have grants, so they have to give the money back. So they might incentivize maximizing scope. So for example, if the contingency is retired early enough, sometimes they'll identify a specific scope that if the design builder can get it into the overall project, they'll get an incentive for that. So you just tailor it. You could also do, like I said before, those key performance indicators, like I said previously. So that's the basic structure. And we're going to talk about some specific things later. The IPD Alliancing basic structure. This is a reflection of my lack of PowerPoint skills, but this is essentially what it is. So it's typically identified as a 3-party contract. These days, it's often a multi-party contract, including major subcontractors or maybe separate designer skills, but everybody is included in the same contract together. The risk structure is, let's start with the responsibilities are very similar to a CM at risk type situation, a very heavily collaborative CM at risk. So we've got the owner, again, responsible to provide funds, project requirements. The designer is responsible for designing to that professional standard of care. The constructor is responsible for doing a robust and collaborative evaluation of the design with the whole team. And then once that is done, though, typical to other types of construction manager at risk, unless the constructor actually provides a substitute design, which is not very common, their liability is going to be limited to not the performance requirements, but the prescriptive requirements in the set of plans and specifications that ultimately they decide to the parties decide to go forward with. Project, again, very open, completely transparent, open book. The owner pays the actual cost. So the cost in a project like this is segregated from profit. Overhead and profit is typically what home office overhead and profit is a concept in progressive design build. That's less of a concept with respect to those reimbursable concepts. The profit itself is taken out of the actual cost of the project. So whatever those costs are, the owner will pay for it. If it is an IPD alliancing structure done well, then there is no upper limit. The owner takes the super risk for those costs. The profit of all of the parties to the contract, the non-owner parties, are included in a risk reward mechanism that is a spectrum of possibilities. Oftentimes, there is a risk reward that is based on cost, but I have also seen structures that do a similar thing to what happens with those progressive design build incentives, where it's based on maximizing scope or maximizing value to the owner. All of these are very specifically explained and developed collaboratively between the parties. And the point is to get rid of the contingencies. Contingencies are typically whereas in a design build project, the design builder is managing its risk through the use of a contingency. Here, there is no contingency because the owner is actually ultimately taking the risk of the project. And there's a strict limitation of liability for claims by the owner against the designer and the constructor, actually claims by any party against any other party, because they're all in the same contract. Technically, they could make claims against each other, but there is a no sue clause. You can't, with limited exceptions, which we'll talk about in a minute, you can't make claims against each other. So that last part is the key difference between the two. And but there's so many similarities. So right now we're going to talk about similarities. How are these similar? And I got to say, so when we started off utilizing progressive design build in my state, and actually I also worked extensively on stuff in California as well. The West Coast of the United States is really where progressive design build took off, and now the rest of the country is playing a little bit of catch up. But we looked at the IPD model in order to be able to structure how we were going to process through the contract. So similarities: qualifications focused procurement, highly collaborative. It is developed in phases. Risk is managed through an information exchange. There are limited change orders and full cost transparency. Let's talk a little bit about what I mean by each of those. In the procurement, I'll get to those two questions. Those are great questions in the chat. In the procurement, our procurements are not based on cost, with the exception of if you have to have cost, we limit it to something that we don't want to audit. I don't want to audit somebody's overhead and profit fee percentage. So we're very clear about what that overhead and profit fee percentage is based on. And if that changes, we'll change the contract. But we are focused on making sure that we get the exact right team for this project. That's very similar in IPD. Those procurements are focused not on, the cost or, promises that they're going to make for some of the scope. They're always based on how did your past performance enhance your ability to be able to work on this project, and what tools and processes and management plans are you going to bring to this project that will show us that you can actually perform the work. And most of the time, we are looking at the very same things. We're looking at the people, we're looking at those processes, and if you're doing it right, you're utilizing Lean. And we are looking at how they are going to collaborate with the owner, because you can utilize Lean and not necessarily be collaborative. Collaboration. We utilize collaboration very similarly as in IPD. Collaboration is expressed in the contract, but we all know that that's probably not enforceable. But what is enforceable is a structured process where we utilize working groups, we utilize project team, the project. It's often called a project implementation team in both structures, and then an executive level team where we allow those working groups the autonomy to be able to work within their budget and schedule, and then that is reported up through a series of structured and tracked and fully transparent and collaboratively developed deliverables that goes up to the project management team, that then when there are issues that need to be resolved, go up through to the senior executives. Heavy use of Lean design and construction principles. I do not know how you could do either IPD, alliancing, or progressive design build without those heavy collaborative principles put in there. The parties are fully engaged in the process. I always say with progressive design build, just like with anything else, this is not a spectator sport. Owners that want to just sit back and allow the design builder to do its thing, I'm like, just why are you doing progressive? It should, I don't even know how that would work. But we utilize consensus decision making. The difference with that, we'll talk about that in the differences. There are some differences in who gets to make the final decision based upon the risks in the project, but ultimately the structure itself is very much the same, and the requirements for engagement and collaboration are very much the same. So with respect to development, both types of delivery methods utilize an initial validation process. And in that validation process, I mean, we all use target value delivery in some means, way, or form, and we all use pull planning in some means or form. And if you don't have a target and you don't have, the date by which you want to finish the project or what your goal is, you can't pull plan, and you can't use target value delivery or target value design. So we all start with a validation process to establish those goals, to establish those targets. And so once we agree on that, we go through pre-construction and design development, where the constructor is heavily involved in the design as well as the owner. We're doing that big room. We're utilizing the over-the-shoulder reviews. Everything is fully transparent, and it's developed in the same way. After we establish the parameters around the project, we then go into construction, commissioning, closeout, ultimately warranty and turnover, then warranty. So those processes, all risks always exist on all construction projects, and those processes are really what all the same. And we'll talk about the differences in a little bit, but you should think about this structure as being pretty much identical. In progressive design build in this, we make sure that people understand that the final commercial terms are not developed in validation. It's a target. It is a way to align everybody's expectations. And that works the same way in the IPD and alliancing. The risk in both projects is managed through an exchange of information. That robust, transparent collaboration is absolutely essential. In both projects, the owner has a fairly substantial risk because the ultimate cost of the project is not established, ultimate schedule, the scope, none of that is established at the beginning of the project, and the owner requires that robust exchange of information all the way through. In both processes, I always like to think of it as the contract will take you by the hand and walk you through the progression of how the parties are going to develop it. It looks different with every project depending on the types of deliverables, the types of permitting, the types of working with those third parties, like dealing with utilities or dealing with, all of that stuff. But we're going to structure the contract so the parties agree at the beginning, like how they are going to work with each other, what kinds of information they're going to exchange, and a requirement that is not, we're trying to get out of design, estimate, value engineer, that horrible cycle that you just get into that do loop. Again, we're both are utilizing those lean techniques. There are actually limited change orders in both types of projects for the very reason that when you develop a project collaboratively with another entity, you are you're identifying and incorporating, and in progressive design build, you're pricing, and in IPD and alliancing, you are establishing those risks. We know what those are before any of the final commercial terms are established. And I know that IPD alliancing, it doesn't seem like there are final commercial terms, but you need to know when and how that profit is at risk and under what circumstances it is. So until that is established, the parties are really diving in deep to those risks, understanding them, and then collaboratively and precisely allocating the risk between the parties. Those collaborative escalation of issues is also a reason that we have limited change orders, because we are pushing the resolution of the issues not in a reactionary claim situation, but we are allowing those issues to go through the escalation ladder before it actually becomes a something that one of the parties needs to make a final decision. So in IPD, it would be the owner making a final decision. There would be a possibility for claims in progressive design build once you reach those commercial terms, but they are significantly limited because that collaborative process really does help to lower the risk. And then we have full cost transparency for everything in both models. You just can't manage those risks. Both are implemented with a cost reimbursable contract, which is extremely administratively complex to manage. But regardless of the delivery method, that is not an easy thing to manage. But it is one of the things that we do manage it through, again, through information and full transparency. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about some of the differences. And this is sort of an overview of those differences: pricing, limitation of liability, outcomes and warranty, and then disputes and claims. So the pricing structure, and these are not as fun because my limited PowerPoint skills do not allow me to put any pictures in this. Otherwise, I'm a very colorful picture person. So PDB, like I said before, is cost plus with a GMP. The risk portion of that for a design builder is that costs in excess of a guaranteed maximum price are at the risk of the design builder. However, we do manage their risk by identifying and pricing contingencies, and also being very deliberative as to when they might get a change order. In a PDB project, there are limited changes, but there are often intentional changes. So for example, the parties might establish a known baseline for geotechnical risks within certain parameters, but if they go outside those parameters, the parties will enter into a change order, a known potential change order. And I don't like people to think of them as bad things. I like for people to think of them as we're allocating those risks in a way that makes sense. We might put an assumption in a contract that says permitting is going to occur, within 6 months, because that's what we all think permitting is going to happen. But, if the permitting agency takes longer, the design builder will get relief for that through the changes process. So there again, limited changes, but we do utilize the change process to be able to allocate and accurately and fairly define those risks. The incentives, disincentives are, again, based on the party's risks. It can include savings, performance, maximizing scopes. Disincentives in one of these contracts is typically limited to a liquidated remedy. But again, those liquidated remedies are designed to both establish the ability to recover from the beginning, but also limit the liability for either of the parties. So you actually sometimes see liquidated damages that the design builder may be able to get from the owner if certain assumptions are not played out. So you have a bunch of assumptions and clarifications on that GMP to make sure that if these identified risks come up, or if these issues come up, or unidentified risks, we always have force majeure in there, but that the design builder will get relief for those issues. But they are a lot limited than what you would get in IPD and alliancing. In IPD alliancing, the owner provides the actual costs with no maximum. So whatever the contract costs, actually also with schedule, whatever the schedule is, the owner is going to pay for that. The profit and risk for the parties to the contract, the non-owner parties, is segregated and determined through whatever the performance metrics are for that particular project. And as I said before, people have gotten super creative with what these performance metrics can be. They could be straight up cost and schedule, but they could also be different key performance indicators associated with that particular project. Now, this is the piece where the IPD alliancing parties get in and dig in and figure out, okay, so what happens if, and much like with the design build, we are number of donuts brought into the big room. There you go. Just like with design build, the design build folks are, utilizing cost and assumptions. The IPD folks are utilizing risk and reward. And those incentives and disincentives are built into a profit risk pool. And typically they are no fault. So everybody gains together and everybody loses together, regardless of who is at fault in those particular issues. With the liability and the financial, on PDB, we try to place that risk with the party best able to manage price or insure the risk with an overall limitation of liability. With IPD and alliancing, that whole risk is built into the fee, and there is a no sue clause, meaning that, at least if it's done well, nobody can sue anybody else outside of those specific risks. So, for example, you can sue the insurance company, you can sue third parties, but it is very important that because there's no contingency built in and they don't have a contingency to be able to manage their risk underneath the pricing model, if there's no contingency to manage the risk, you shouldn't be able to sue or have somebody get a claim. But what they try to do is make sure that there is adequate insurance and other means to be able to deal with that. There's also a big difference in how the ultimate responsibility for the performance of the project is. So progressive design build has that design build liability, which means that we look at those. Design builders don't promise perfection. What they do say is if there are identified and measurable performance standards in the project, they will meet those performance standards, and it's a toggle. They either meet them or they don't. And then typically the results of not meeting those performance standards are identified in the contract as well, because just the law of remedies doesn't allow you to have speculative damages and all that kind of fun stuff. I'm not a Canadian lawyer, but I understand our processes are quite similar. The warranty for the Spearin warranty, which is in the United States and I believe also in Canada, which is that anybody who gets prescriptive plans and specifications, the person providing those prescriptive plans and specifications warrant them for the purposes of achieving the performance goals of the project. That's very limited in progressive design build. We specifically identify any reliable documents when we price it, and they can rely on those reliable documents for the purposes of the pricing mechanism. But ultimately, the design builder, because they control the designer of record, will be responsible for achieving those performance requirements. For all the other issues, the design builder provides the typical standard of care and then the typical construction warranty that they're going to, everything's going to be good quality and new unless otherwise expressed in the contract documents, basically what you would normally see. In many projects, the overall liability to the design builder is limited to a specific sum. Again, we don't allow for company killing projects, and we use a series of insurance products, including things like builder's risk, liability, pollution liability, all of that kind of stuff, to craft an overall limitation of liability that includes both payment from the design builder and also insurance products. In IPD alliancing, the underlying liability and responsibility is the CM at risk. So the designer is responsible for the professional standard of care, and then the constructor is responsible, even though they are reviewing and analyzing the designs and providing input, typically the responsibility for those designs is not pushed over to somebody who doesn't have that liability underneath them as a sub. And the owner ultimately, the designer doesn't really, but it's still the owner providing that spare and warranty to the constructor so they can rely on the plans that they are actually building. Anybody who is receiving prescriptive plans should be able to rely on them. And if they build that, that is the limit of their liability. Their warranties are typically limited to passing through product warranties, limited correction of defective work, but there is not an overall performance warranty for the project, and that is very, very closely defined and oftentimes reimbursable with a warranty reserve and capped at the warranty reserve, meaning that let's just say post substantial completion, oftentimes you'll have a pot of money to pay the contractor to actually correct defective work. And the owner does not receive that performance warranty like they would receive in design build. But what they're getting in both cases is an incredibly well-managed, just because you don't get the performance warranty doesn't mean that I like CM at risk as a delivery model, because anytime you integrate and you utilize the lean techniques, you have a project that's going to work pretty well. The last thing that I want to talk about that's a big difference, and then after this we'll open it up for some questions, is the issue of disputes and claims. And I mentioned this before, but I want to go into this a little bit differently. Once you establish in PDB those commercial terms, then the design builder is responsible for determining how to reach those performance standards, because if you don't give them the discretion to determine how to reach them, you can't shift that liability to them. But anything over and above that GMP, they're of course being responsible for. So when we look at a project governance structure that is very, very similar, and before we establish the GMP, the owner gets to make the decision with respect to what's the scope, what's going to be in, what's not going to be in, how is it going to look, how is it going to perform. All of those things are up to the owner to decide. But once those commercial terms are established, then the design builder has the ultimate responsibility for establishing achieving the contract within that GMP. Because that is their risk, they get to decide how to do that. The owner can't come in and establish new and additional criteria, responsibilities for the design builder, that, if they do that, then that's going to be a change. It's going to be the result of a change order. So the decision making is very different. We do, again, when we have those disputes, we take it through an escalation ladder, but ultimately it goes to a binding dispute provider, hopefully something that is done very quickly, because as we all know, those disputes need to be resolved as quickly as possible so we get back to reliable information back and forth between the parties. In IPD alliancing, there's, again, strict limitations of liability. Their liability is limited to the fee that they put at risk in the project and the insurance provided. That's pretty much it. Again, because there aren't any contingencies for them to draw from, they can't manage, they can't handle it's not with, they haven't priced or put into the contract the ability to manage that risk through anything other than the profit, which is, shouldn't be something that gets eaten away by a common risk in the contract. If there's not a contingency to manage that. So the owner ends up being the final decision maker because they are taking the super risk for cost and schedule and other things. There is that no sue clause. And then there are insurance products that the parties purchase and utilize for the purposes of managing risk of things that are typically insured. So that would be your builder's risk, all the stuff that you would normally have, the package of insurances. Okay, so is there something else I wanted to? I think that's it, but I am so happy to open this up now to any questions that you guys might have.
Awesome. Thanks, Robynne. So like my key takeaway, I like what you said, is that progressive design build, it's not a spectator sport. So uh, you want to choose the best team rather than choosing like the best price or the best schedule, right? Because you're going to have to get into it, right?
Yeah,
So
we want those selection criteria. We don't, I mean, we will get maybe their process, their plan to put together the pricing structure and their processes, their tools, all of that stuff, what their plan is to putting together their schedule, but we don't ask for the ultimate cost
yeah,
or
it's
schedule.
so funny because every time we kick these things off, it's like, what's the price? What's the schedule? Whoa, hold on a second. Who's going to be on the bus first? Right.
Exactly. Oh yeah, especially we have to select based upon who the individuals and the companies, but the individuals performing the work.
All right, awesome. So before we get into question and answers, I encourage everyone to stay connected. We continue the conversation sparked today, explore opportunities for collaboration, join our LinkedIn page, and visit our YouTube channel to see this recording, which I'll post there, and as well recordings of past presentations that we've had before as well too. So go there. There's a whole bunch of a tickle trunk of knowledge there to sit there and dive down into that rabbit hole. Again, feel free to post your questions in the chat or utilize the raise hand feature if you prefer to ask your questions verbally. Again, remember to unmute yourself before speaking, and we're eager to hear your questions, engage in a really cool discussion, and you can start posting questions or raising your hand right away. And the first question I'm going to put up here, it came from Mr. Beardface, Geoff, down in Calgary.
Pronounced Jeff or Mr. Beardface. I'm good with either.
He's not going to turn his camera on now, but he's got this magnificent beard, unless he shaved it today. Which
he turned it on previously.
Oh yeah, I think he was
when he came on. I noticed.
I saw his face.
My son's name is Jeff.
Face.
I'll tell you a really funny story. My son's name is Jeff, and we spelled it the normal way, but we did. My name is spelled very oddly, as you can see, and so everybody kept asking us how we were going to spell it. And so, what we tell people is Geophreigh. So Geoffrey.
Well, Robyn, I know it's Jeff, but he's Sate and I'm Nate, and so I cannot not walk by without poking a button occasionally.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
So, anyways, so Jeff's
later
question,
on, I'll give the historical conversation of how the Americans spell Jeff.
Don't even. We're.
So, Jeff, I'll let you ask your questions that you had in the chat.
Sure, a couple of early questions, and you partially answered them through the presentation, Robyn. Thank you. Most of the contract types we have seem to separate the owner from the decision chain. And while progressive design build is progressive, the structure you outlined is still, the owner's up here and everybody doing the work is over there. So how do you manage that risk in a progressive design build so that the owner does not let it become a spectator sport?
That's a great question. And the answer is that is a contractual structure, not a performance structure. So we have the very similar. In fact, it's drawn from the examples from all collaborative delivery, because I try to utilize lean principles anytime that I can in a contract. So the governance structure for the contract typically will have participation from members of the design build team as part of the project implementation team, as part of the working groups, and as part of the executive structure. All of those folks are driven to make decisions by consensus, and when they can't, we pop it up to the next level of the project governance so that, well, there's a couple of reasons why you would pop it up. One, they can't reach consensus, or two, it's outside of their authority. Everybody has specific authority levels because, even the senior executive team perhaps has to go back to a commission or has to go back to a board of directors for very large changes or very large issues in the project. So we do work through consensus-based delivery. The big difference is when you get to those final decisions before in PDB, it's before it would go into a claims process. In IPD, it's just the final decision. The owner who's taking the super risk for all that stuff makes the final decision in IPD. And in design build, it is a contingent final decision. And there's a determination as to whether somebody wants to take it to the binding dispute resolution. But until you get to that point, the decision-making process is very, very similar.
Thank you. And my second question you actually answered in your collaboration slide about having the structured process to allow teams to work together. So thank you for that.
You know, Jeff, I will tell you that one of the most in fact, a contract is a terrible, regardless of which contract you use, regardless of which delivery method you use. The contract is the worst means of enforcing collaboration. You can't dictate collaboration with any delivery method. So the most important thing is to select a design build team that has a history and has a recognized process for collaboration. So the most effective means to manage that is how they did on their last project. And that is, from what I can tell, from a marketing perspective for these teams, that business drive is the most, that's the biggest driver. The contract is a driver, but the contract's too big a hammer. The driver is they're not going to get the next project if they can't collaborate and do an excellent job on this one.
Agreed. And what you've now hit on it twice, building that structure, that place, that time explicitly to allow that collaboration is something that we don't often do.
Yes, and not just giving lip service to it, like driving it home, training people, making sure, and it's both parties that have that resistance to collaboration. They all want to shore up the defenses and none of them want to disclose anything. And I mean, you really have to like challenge them on how they're gonna go forward in the contract, because not everybody, a lot of people pay lip service to it. That's absolutely true. I will see all kinds of, I facilitate proposals mostly, facilitate the selection process for these projects. It's a large part of what I do. And so many people will come in with, we are so collaborative. We're going to design it. They're going to design it, not we. They're going to design it. We're going to estimate it. And then we'll work with you to value engineer it. And I'm like, fail. That's wrong. You can't, that's not how you're going to get this project. So, you know, we do a pretty deep dive into what their processes are. We meet with them. We have these open, crazy meetings that make people in Canada, makes their heads explode as to, you know, we literally just say, let's have a project meeting. And then, you know, the information we get from that is something that we utilize in the overall scoring. I've discovered as a Val and Shafrazno, that makes people in Canada, it makes your heads explode, but that's what we do.
Not all of us.
It makes a lot of people, there were heads exploding when I suggested that.
Yeah, and it's important to spend time investing in that ahead of time before things go bad, right? Because usually what happens, it goes bad, then we go, oh, let's collaborate. Well, yeah, that's good, but you know, if you put it ahead of time, invest in it, then when these things that go bad, it goes much more smoother.
Yeah. Also signaling both through the contract and through the processes and the goals. I'm a big believer in having some project goals from the beginning, both to signal to these teams, this is a priority. Collaboration, utilizing Lean, all of that stuff is a priority for this project. So we're going to select you based upon whether you can demonstrate to us that you are also going to have it as a priority.
Awesome. Did you have any further questions, Jeff?
Nope. No,
Cool.
I'm thinking and taking notes.
No worries. Next question was from Bruce in the chat. Bruce said, would you expand on the risk cost exposure of the owner in DB and PDB due to poorly developed scope or owner requirements or owner initiating scope changes during construction?
Right. Big difference between DB, traditional design build, and progressive design build. The risk cost exposure in traditional design build is pretty extensive unless the owner does one of two things. Either they have generous requirements, meaning that they are willing to accept the solution that the design builder proposes within the cost and schedule the design builder proposes. So I find those types of projects for me to be very difficult because there's so much that is determined in a public project outside of the collaboration from the owner. There is incredibly limited and structured collaboration only allowed because you have to keep the, you have to keep the same messaging consistent because they're pricing it. And in progressive design build, if you're doing it well, you are identifying your first, and this is the key to any of these projects. We align ourselves at the beginning and we have a good, robust determination of what is feasible. It's really just a feasibility analysis. What's feasible and what's possible, right? We don't know yet what's possible because we haven't really defined the various pieces, because in this feasibility and the validation, we typically don't design. And those design parameters do further refine what is possible. But, if we have a great process to determine what's feasible, what is the project itself feasible? Is the owner going to obtain value for the cost that we've established? And what is possible? Have we left room for making, achieving the best project goals, like creating excellence and all of that? And as we're collaboratively developing, the owner can manage its risk by just getting involved in the project and understanding what's happening, and when you're choosing by advantages, understanding the advantages that are being presented. And the design builder can help manage their risk by doing a good job of daylighting the bad news. I want a design builder who is willing to tell my client what the bad news is as early as possible so that we can together work on that, right? How can we manage that? And then if we're talking about the bad news all the way along, when we get to that GMP discussion, we can actually utilize the risks that we've developed, and then we place the risk. So we know there's a risk of a delay. So we're gonna allocate that risk. Maybe we'll give, this is the scheduled date that we're aiming for, but we're gonna give a 30-day grace period, and then we'll have some liquidated remedies, and we might have some incentives. But we're gonna place that on what's reasonable and allow people to be rewarded. But the owner, ultimately, we're going to be managing that to those particular risks. So it's a different structure for sure. But a lot of owners I know aren't comfortable really with taking super risk for a lot of that stuff. Hope that works.
Yeah, that answered my question. Thanks very much.
Great.
Awesome. Are there any other questions that anyone has for Robynne? Yeah, again, you can post in the chat, or you can use the raise hand feature. We got time for maybe one more. Bueller. I'm kind of curious. What's your favorite project to date or is there one that you're currently working on that's it's just going on really, really good? that use this collaborative stuff that you've been talking about, that it's stuck in your mind?
Yes, I am. Yes, actually, I am working on, and all of this is public information that I'm disclosing. I'm working on an incredibly cool first of a kind, or it's a first following, I guess, but it's not been done before, small modular nuclear reactor. So it's the new technology. There's one happening in Wyoming, there's one happening in Texas, there's one happening in Washington. We're the only one that's utilizing progressive design build, and I think by the nature of that, we're going to be eclipsing them. But the structure of that is incredibly exciting, and the new technology, if it works, they say it works. I'm not a physicist. I don't know. But it's incredibly exciting for so many reasons. Not just the fact that it's cool, but it could also resolve a lot of issues with big issues, climate issues, that kind of thing. So very exciting. That is actually my favorite project. And also, not just because it's a cool project, but I feel like everyone involved in this project thus far is laser focused on making sure that we have the most collaborative team possible. And that just sings to my heart. I love that.
And you guys will probably have a lot of value alignment as well too, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, that there is, it is very exciting when it comes to how people are going to approach this, provide that value, but also just deep collaboration between the parties is going to have to happen. So I love that.
Awesome. Well, again, Robynne, thank you for sharing with us today. And, from everyone up here in Alberta and Edmonton in Canada, we want to thank you for sharing your knowledge. And again, everyone in attendance, thank you for being part of LeanYEG and contributing to the growth of a very thriving lean community of practice here in Edmonton. And
thank you for having me. Yeah. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Happy Friday, everybody. I hope I hear the birds singing in the background as well, too. Spring is coming.